Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what I like to call a quiet revolution in science. It's a shift that is completely changing how we view the long-term physical impacts of childhood trauma. We're going to take a really close look at a fascinating body of research that fundamentally rewires the way we understand adversity, health, and what it truly means to heal. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. We spend so much time obsessing over eating right, going to the gym, trying to prevent heart disease or cancer. But what if the greatest threat to your adult health was actually something that happened before you even turned 18? Well, this was the absolute bombshell dropped by the groundbreaking 1998 Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs, study. It proved that childhood adversity is a massive, powerful predictor of adult mortality. It literally shapes our lifelong health risk. Section 1, the hidden burden of trauma. 52%. Just let that sink in. That is a truly staggering statistic. When researchers asked adults about a specific set of childhood adversities, things like experiencing abuse or living with a family member who struggled with substance misuse or incarceration, over half of the original sample reported experiencing at least one of them. And here's what makes that number even more shocking. This original study was conducted on a predominantly middle-class, college-educated, and insured population. Trauma wasn't just some niche issue affecting a small fraction of society. It was literally hiding in plain sight. Okay, let's dive right into this because the data gets even more profound. You see, that original 52% mostly looked at trauma inside the family home. But modern research uses a much broader lens. When we factor in what we call polyvictimization, which includes things like peer bullying and community violence, the rate shoots up to around 80%. And when we look at broad lifetime adversity, bringing in factors like the sudden loss of a loved one or severe socioeconomic strain, we hit 98%. What this massive jump shows us is that the idea of the non-victim is largely a myth. Almost everyone carries some burden of adversity. Section 2, trauma under the skin. So you might be wondering, how exactly do these emotional experiences turn into physical diseases like cancer or diabetes decades down the line? Well, it comes down to arguably the most revolutionary discovery of the ACEs research, the concept of the dose-response effect. Researchers found that individuals who experienced 4 or more types of adverse childhood experiences saw a marked exponential increase in severe health risks. It's not just about experiencing a single, isolated trauma. It's about the cumulative dose. It's the sheer weight of different types of traumas piling up on a developing system. When we break down the complex biological pathways here, we can see exactly how that dose response actually works. On the physiological side, repeated trauma overworks systems like the HPA axis. Think of the HPA axis as essentially your body's 911 alarm system. Constantly tripping that alarm leads to chronic inflammation, which is a massive contributor to conditions like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Emerging research even points to epigenetic changes, meaning trauma can actually alter how your DNA is expressed. On the psychosocial side, this constant allostatic load, which is basically like running a car engine in the red for years, can trigger vicious cycles. This intense biological stress often leads folks to self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, causing even further harm and damaging the interpersonal networks they desperately need for recovery. Section 3, beyond the family system. You know, for most of the 20th century, our view of trauma was incredibly siloed. Researchers looked at just one type of abuse at a time, basically treating people as either a binary victim or non-victim, and they mostly focused only on psychological outcomes like anxiety. The modern ACEs revolution completely shatters that old way of thinking. It shows us that trauma is cumulative, it operates on a strict dose-response curve, and its impacts are deeply biopsychosocial, affecting the whole body and the mind together. To capture the true burden of trauma, especially for marginalized populations, we absolutely have to expand our scope. Systemic issues must be factored into an individual's actual trauma dose. This means recognizing the real physical impact of pure victimization, community violence, poverty, and the profound chronic stress caused by systemic racism and all discrimination. If we only look at family-level ACEs, we are systematically underestimating the heavy trauma burden endured by so many people. Section 4, the myth of bouncing back. So the crucial point here is that we need to throw out the whole inoculation myth. We've all heard the cliche, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It implies that a little bit of trauma acts like a vaccine, sort of toughening you up for the future. Well, it turns out Friedrich Nietzsche was a philosopher, not a biologist. The data completely debunks this. The reality is a linear dose response. 1 adversity is worse than 0, 2 is worse than 1. any exposure simply increases a person's baseline risk. Simply put, the optimal amount of trauma is exactly 0. And because of this, we genuinely need to rethink what resilience even means. We usually treat protective factors like an airbag, something you only deploy when there's a crash or a major crisis, like calling a hotline or finally going to therapy after a traumatic event. But modern science tells us that resilience should actually be viewed as a Swiss Army knife. It's an additive, versatile set of universally helpful tools and strengths that you carry with you every single day to navigate life, regardless of what your trauma dose might be. Which brings us to Section 5, Building Community Resilience. And this brilliantly illustrates how we actually build that Swiss Army knife across entire communities. Enter the resilience portfolio model. Just as we have a cumulative dose of trauma, we also have a cumulative dose of protective factors. This framework shows that our individual, family, and community strengths can proactively insulate us against adverse experiences. Instead of just waiting around to treat the symptoms of trauma after the fact, building up this robust portfolio of strengths acts as a preventative shield. It actually improves biopsychosocial outcomes even in the face of heavy adversity. We call this the Poly Strengths Portfolio. And instead of just treating these as static concepts, think of them as active daily practices. Things like regulating our emotions effectively, actively leaning on interpersonal support from friends and family, and dedicating time to meaning-making activities like cultivating a real sense of purpose or community connection. What's incredible here is that just as trauma operates on a dose-response curve, so do positive childhood experiences, or PCEs. Having a high dose of these positive strength-building experiences actively attenuates and prevents the negative long-term health outcomes of ACs. As the pioneering psychologist Dr. Ann Maston so brilliantly put it, resilience is ordinary magic. It is not some rare genetic superpower that only a few lucky people possess. It is highly achievable. It is built through everyday, ordinary resources, connections, and support systems that we can actively cultivate within our own families and our neighborhoods to shift the scales of long-term health in our favor. The science is abundantly clear here, folks. The burden of trauma is heavy and widespread, but our capacity for resilience is equally pervasive. It's time we stop looking at trauma in isolation and start actively building up the polystrengths that protect our physical and mental health. So I want to leave you with this question to really think about. How can your community foster the positive childhood experiences that build this ordinary magic? What specific systems can you help put in place to ensure that the dose of positive strengths in a child's life far outweighs the dose of adversity? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.